Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to be talking about my polling plans going into the future and as well my general thoughts on the early beta of both Aemeath and Luuk. Right. There are finally some early calcs that of course everybody should take with a grain of salt, but give some insight into the strength of these newest and first 3.x DPSs. So let's get into it. When the first beta came out, Luuk was actually stronger than Aemeath, or they were close, right? But because this beta was delayed so much, it seems the people at Kuro are heavily scrambling to, get the kits the way they want them as quickly as possible, because both Ameth and as well as Luuk received nerfs and beta changes legit like 2 or 3 hours after the initial one, right? So I made a community post saying Cart is no longer the strongest DPS, which still holds true, but barely, and I'll get into that in a little bit. And I made it at that time, right, when Aemeath's signature was stronger and Luke's DPS was capable of hitting 2.3, 2.4 million, right? However, that is no longer the case. Luuk is currently, as far as we know, around the 2 million damage per rotation mark with a very simple and easy rotation. For reference, Cartethia has the highest in the game with 2.15 million. Aemeath is tied with Cartethia currently in her best in slot team, full characters and weapon, and everybody else is below them, right? So technically, Luuk is the third strongest DPS in the game, behind Aemeath and Cart when considering premium teams, right? That's really, really good. I mentioned this in one of my community posts, but Luuk is actually one of the best characters to invest in the entirety of the game if you are not interested in pulling signatures. The reason for this is Lene doesn't really care about her signature because of the existence of Static Mist. Static Mist gives attack buffing, while Lene's signature gives damage bonus buffing. They are very similar, and even though her sig is stronger, it isn't necessary in the slightest. Mornai also has a situation where the weapon just isn't worth it. It's only an increase of about 5 to 6% team DPS, which is underwhelming. And then there's also this new 5-star standard gauntlet that is perfect, right? Luuk is a basic attack damage dealer who can inflict his own Toon Strain with his own attack chains. This gives you the full buff when you inflict enemies with Toon Strain, gives attack percent, has this crit rate bonus. It is absolutely perfect for him. It's not as good as his Sig, however, from early calcs, his Sig is legit less than 20% better than this standard 5-star gauntlet, which is incredibly promising. That's like going back to the beginning of 1.x sig jumps as compared to the ones that we've seen in 2.x with like Cartethia, Prolova, Augusta, right? Finally, we have a really good solid alternative for a DPS. Now, what about Aemeath, right? Well, Aemeath was stronger than Cart, okay? Her Sig got nerfed. It used to give 16% fusion res shred, now it only gives 10%. That is a bit of a nerf. Right now, she is tied with Cart after those nerfs. However, before them, she would have been hitting around the 2.3, around their million damage mark, and that would have been the new strongest DPS in the game. However, for now, she's simply tied with Cart, right? So, not the most special. However, Aemeath, one good thing she has is that it seems, at least for the third slot, she does have alternative options. If you don't have Mornai, you can use Chisa even on the Toon Break version of her team, and as well as you can use SK, right? And these both will function as very, very good third slots for Aemeath. She won't be as strong as in her best in slot team with Mornai, but from what I've seen, she is like late 2.x main DPS level without her best in slot team changing the third slot around, right? About 1.8 million damage per rotation. That's Augusta level. That is Hyper Carry level. That is like Galbraina level, right? It is incredibly solid and more than enough for clearing endgame content. So for those who aren't able to afford Mornai, which is incredibly realistic given that Lene, Mornai, and Aemeath are all back-to-back, you will be able to use SK and Chisa completely fine as third slots for Aemeath. Now, when it comes to replacing Lene, I do think that one's a little more tricky, right? The only real alternative to Lene that I can imagine currently is you have Mornai and have Lupa, right? That's about the best I could see an alternative support option working with Aemeath is you get rid of Lene and you use Lupa. I don't think there's anyone else who can really compete or come close to Lene's value in an Aemeath team unless you run Monofusion Aemeath with Lupa. I just don't see it, right? So you can use Lupa as an alternative if you don't have Lene. You can use Chisa SK as an alternative if you don't have Mornai, and she isn't too Sig reliant, right? Similar to Luuk, her Sig jump should be about 20+% something. However, that's low. That's because they nerfed the Sig's fusion res shred. So she also isn't the most reliant on her Sig as originally expected, which is nice. Both of these first 3.x main DPSs have, SIGs that aren't really necessary towards their performance, which is a very, very nice thing to see, right? Now, let's talk about Luuk's teammate, Reliance. This one is going to hurt, okay? Luuk has a very important part of his kit that scales off of having Toon Break Boost and having a lot of it, right? There is only one other character in this game who currently can give Toon Break Boost, which is Lene. How bad is it, you might be asking? Well, with current calcs, average rotation with Lene versus average rotation with Sanhua, Lene is about 50% stronger, okay? It is like Chacona Cartethia levels of a jump, if not larger, right? So, you guys probably need to understand this. Luuk is heavily reliant on a sub DPS who has Toon Break Boost in their kit and can give it to teammates as well. So when he uses Sanhua, his damage per rotation with a normal rotation is about 1.2, 1.3 million. Replace it with Lene, it's now about 2 million or near it, right? So that is that. I will add this one caveat at the end here. If you are a better player at Wuwa and you go out of your way to learn the optimal rotation with Sanhua, there is supposedly a double intro Sanhua rotation that is longer, but if you equivalate the damage, time versus time, you balance it out, it equals to about 1.6 to 1.7 million DBR, right? It's a more sweaty Sanhua rotation, but for those really not wanting to use Lene, that's probably what you're going to have to go out of your way to learn, right? So he can make Sanhua work if you're sweatier with it. However, if you are an average player who doesn't want to bother learning how to actually play your characters like 95% of gacha players, then you will be highly, highly in need or want of Lene, right? So his best in slot team is obviously with Lene and Mornai, and I believe Mornai does play a more significant role in Luuk's team. I don't remember exactly why. I'll look more in depth into their kits when we get later in the beta. However, replacing Mornai with like anyone else makes the team lose like I'd say about 300k damage per rotation, which is not good, right? It doesn't feel the greatest. I think that's a bigger drop off than Aemeath gets from getting rid of Mornai and using someone else, but it is what it is at the end of the day, right? So those are like the early leaks and general thoughts I have about both Luuk and Aemeath. Now, I would like to mention here that technically, going back to what I said at the beginning, and I come back to this, Aemeath is stronger than Cartethia, right? Like she is at base. The reason why Cartethia's premium team is even competitive with Aemeath is because the SIGs matter way more in Cartethia's team, right? For example, Ameth, as mentioned earlier, gets about a 20% something jump from her weapon, whilst Cart gets like a 35+% jump, right? If we look at Linnea's sub DPS weapon, because Static Mist is already an alternative option, it doesn't contribute much towards the team DPS. At max, it's like maybe a 6% buff. But when you compare it to Chacona's sub DPS weapon, which reduces the arrow res of enemies by 10% and increases her own damage, you will notice that this increases Cartethia's team overall DPS by like 12 to 13%, right? And at the same time, Chisa's weapon is also better than Mordai's weapon for buffing the team. So if you were to remove signatures from all of these characters and compare pure S0 R0 performance, Aemeath would 100% be stronger than Cartethia. If I had to guess, by around 10%, right? And then on top of this, I don't think this is going to be Aemeath's strongest team, because this is using the generalist supports of Linnea and Mornai. It would make significantly more sense if they decided to make her negative status team the stronger of the two, since the supports will be more niche, and therefore they want to give people a reason to actually pull them, right? Because if they, let's say, make Sigrika just as strong as the current Aemeath team, but then give her a Chacona weapon, that alone would jump, Aemeath up to like 2.3, 2.4 million damage per rotation, just by giving her a better weapon, not even considering the character being better, right? So I could be wrong, and this is merely my speculation, but I think there is a high chance the current Toonbreak Aemeath team will be, a more accessible team but weaker because it uses generalist supports, while the negative status team for Aemeath, whenever she gets her Fusion Burst sub DPS, will end up actually being the stronger team of the two, and that's where she'll probably hit higher numbers that most would expect from a new Senrez equivalent, right? Could be wrong, all speculation, but I do think this is quite likely. So those are my thoughts on Aemeath. Those are my thoughts on Luuk. Last thoughts on both of them, just when it comes to sequences real quick. Aemeath sequences currently look undercooked. Luuk sequences currently look overcooked, right? Aemeath going from S0 to S3, it seems like the total DPS of the team goes from 2.15 to around 2.85 million, right? A lot of you may think that's a lot, but it isn't really. For example, Cart going to S2, not even doing the optimal S2 rotation of double plunge, is enough to take her to 3 milli, and that's going to S2, right? So Aemeath sequences are currently pretty undercooked. They're like actually kind of closer to early 2.x, 1.x main DPS level as compared to late 2.x main DPS level and like Cart level. But Luuk is the complete opposite. Luuk going from S0 to S3 is an astronomical jump, and it more than makes up for him being slightly weaker than Aemeath at base with S0. So Luuk apparently can go over 3 million damage from his like 1.95 million at S0 base, going from S0 to S3, which is like Brant level sequences of getting basically a 90% DPS jump. So for Luuk wanners currently, if you are a investor into sequences, especially for males because they don't come by often in this game, it is incredibly worth it to invest into them as far as we know currently. And then for Aemeath, her sequences currently look a bit undercooked, right? They do look a bit undercooked as compared to Luuk's. However, sequences change quite often when it comes to these betas, so try not to stress too much about it. I'll of course try to update you guys. Right, now that I've gotten my general thoughts about Aemeath and Luuk out of the way, I want to talk about my own account and who I might pull, right? So when it comes to this account, I've actually gotten pretty recently lucky, okay? There have been two things that have happened after I took a break from this account for a bit and came back. One, I got Linnea very quickly, right? I got Linnea in about 10, 15 pity, which was huge, and it made me come back to maining this account over my Cart one. However, on top of this, today on stream, I actually got another early 5-star at about less than 10 pity I lost the 50-50, but that's fine because I'm on a guarantee, right? Originally, I wanted to get Aemeath. However, after seeing how strong Luke's sequence investment is, because I have no issues going for sequence investment down the line, for now, my plan is to actually get Luuk and then Mornai on the Annie rerun banners. This way, I would be able to have a Luuk best in slot team. I would be able to get Kanta whenever she reruns for Prolova, and then I'd also have my QU1, probably using some filler team with like Mortefi Verena, right? Now, it's not like I'm leaving my QU1 in the dust. Apparently, there is a leaked Echo set that implies there will be an Arrow main DPS that focuses on Echo skill damage, it likely somewhere in 3.2. If this ends up being true, that would obviously mean 99% chance likelihood that QU1 ends up being best in slot for this character. So depending on their design and depending on their strength, I might pull her as well, pair her with my QU1, and now I'd have 3 premium teams, one with Luuk, one with that girl with QU1, and the other one with my Prolova. Now, would I pull more teams after this? Probably not, okay? At least not for a little bit, because once again, I'm pulling Luuk because I want to go into his sequence investment and the fact that the team doesn't really need their signatures at all. However, also, I'm probably not going to be interested in pulling anyone after I get Rebecca, right? I have been waiting for Rebecca to release for the Cyberpunk collab in this game for an absolute fuck ton of time. And so when she finally comes, I don't see myself pulling anyone, at least for now, right? So, love you all. Hope you have a great day. Hope you have a great night. Want to give you guys a quick update on the current early beta leaks of these 2 new DPSs, and peace out.